presentation in webinar format, meaning all participant microphones will be muted. During the presentation, please utilize the Q&A feature to ask any questions you may have. Depending on the volume of questions, if we can't get to your question before the end of the hour, we will have someone from our team follow up with you directly. Today's presentation is eligible for 1 social work credit. We would like to thank our educational sponsor, Jumanu Grassi, for her assistance in obtaining these credits. In order to receive your credit, you must stay on for the duration of the webinar. And once the webinar has ended, the evaluation will appear on your screen. After you finish the evaluation, please allow 2 weeks for the delivery of your certificate of completion via email. This webinar is part of a continuation of our DMV webinar series, which started last year as part of our ongoing outreach from Encore Outpatient Services. Since I joined Encore as the executive director last month, I'm excited to share with you some of the exciting things happening here and remind you of the services we provide in the DMV community. First, we provide substance abuse treatment services. Our daytime PHP and IOP both take place up to 5 days a week, both in person and virtually. Additionally, our evening IOP takes place 3 days per week and is all virtual. We also offer individual therapy sessions, family education and support, recovery coaching, psychiatry and medication management, and nutritional counseling with a registered dietitian. Lastly, Encore also provides a general group therapy with people in recovery in the evenings up to 2 days per week. These groups are 90 minutes in length and they are all virtual right now. We discuss substance abuse, process addiction, and compulsive behaviors in this group with a primary focus on living life in recovery. If you would like to learn more about Encore and our services, we will provide contact information at the conclusion of today's presentation. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Graham Hall. After a successful 15-year career as a salesman, Graham decided to change his career path by obtaining his master's degree in organizational counseling from Johns Hopkins University. His new career path in executive coaching led him to work for such organizations as the Library of Congress, the Joint Oceanographic Institutions, and the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. During this time, Graham was offered a position of Assistant Clinical Director at the Colmack Clinic in Washington, D.C., and returned to Johns Hopkins to complete his clinical training as a counselor. Graham found his passion for counseling and opened his private practice where he works with individual clients, couples, and groups. Please welcome Graham Hall.
Thank you. I'm Graham, and the way I wanted to speak to you today, I didn't want to throw a lot of theory at you because I thought it'd be a little bit dry. So I wanted to do it more in a story format and basically walk you through how I ended up or arrived at attachment theory and integrated it into working with patients with addiction. But just a brief history of me so you know where my perspective is coming from. I was born into an alcoholic household. I became an alcoholic and addict in my 20s through the support and direction of my family. I got into treatment, thank God, because I had lost the ability to stop on my own. And after a few years of sobriety, I got into working in the field. But when I was in treatment, the one thing I couldn't get my head around, I had no problem accepting the fact that I was an addict and alcoholic, because obviously my life had become totally unmanageable. And so accepting the fact that I was an alcoholic or addict was easy enough. But the thing I could not get my head around was why, if everybody felt the way I felt when I was high, why wasn't everybody an addict or alcoholic? I didn't get the why everybody wasn't. And I finally went to my counselor, who is this wise old German guy named Gabriel Brooks, who was a doctor. And I said, Doc, I just can't get this part of it. Why isn't everybody an alcoholic and addict if they feel the way I do when I'm high? And he said, exactly. I didn't quite understand that. He said, only an addict or alcoholic feels the way you do when they get high. Normal people, they feel something, but they don't feel what you feel. You feel something special when you get high. And that always stuck with me. And after treatment, I got heavily involved in AA, and but that thought stayed with me. What was that feeling that I got? And I wanted to find out. Oh, what does that say? Oh, sorry, I'm just checking the chat. Not for me. Anyway, so I wanted to figure out what that feeling was because I thought that if I could recreate that feeling in my sobriety, I would be that much safer from relapse. Uh, so, I engaged in 12-step work. I was part of the AA. And like most people, I probably got way too caught up in the program of AA and the spirituality and fighting that and all that kind of things. But I started to feel better somehow. And I attribute that more to the fellowship than to the program. And I think that is the foundation of what makes 12 steps so uh, successful, is that it is an incredibly safe platform to begin to uh, build secure attachments with other people. Um, and so I think that's the real strength of it. But I went on and eventually I ended up working in a treatment center myself. It happened to be the same organization where I got sober. So the karma of it, I could not resist it. So I went to work there. And back then, coming out of school, it was all CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. I was very directive. That may have helped people somewhat. But again, I think really what was helping most about the program was the fact that we did a lot of group work and people were beginning the process of learning how to connect to each other. And I was nowhere near as important to the whole process as I thought I was. But unfortunately, I was promoted and then I just was working with the staff. And really, I liked working with the patients. So about 10 years ago, I decided to open a private practice um, and explore the idea of psychotherapy, which I didn't know much about. But when I asked friends in the field about it, they said, well, the way you become a psychotherapist is you do your own therapy. So I found a therapist who was who worked with other therapists and started the process of psychotherapy and seeing patients at the same time. And he said a few things to me pretty early on, which uh, really were attachment based. He didn't frame them in terms of attachment. I don't even know if he thought of them in terms of attachment, but there were basic attachment issues. And he said, first of all, how long do you want to work with these people? And, I thought 1, 2 years. And he said, no, we're throwing that out. We're going to use a 10-year model. And I thought, boy, I don't know what I'm going to talk to these people about for 10 years. I mean, that's crazy. I don't have friends for 10 years. Uh, I mean, big red flag, attachment issues. And then he said, do you really want more out of your life? And I was fairly ambitious, so I said yes. And he said, well, from where I sit, you've about maximized what you're going to get out of your life doing it on your own. And if you want more out of your life, you're really going to have to learn how to rely on other people. Okay. It's a little coded there, but that's attachment. Was what he was talking about. Okay. And again, I don't know if he thought that's what he was talking about, but that's what he was talking about. I was not building strong attachment with other people in my life. And so I wasn't fully getting the most out of my sobriety that I could. Um, so, things were progressing. I'm still thinking about what is this feeling I got when I was drinking and how can I recreate it in my life? And the neuroscience of addiction was also progressing. And, they were starting to understand that the brain chemistry of addicts is different from normal people. Uh, and what they believe now pretty much is that where a normal person will process substance use as a thought or desire, which is up in the cortex, an addict uh, processes substance use as need fulfillment, which is down in the center of the brain around the amygdala area. And I mean, right there, you're looking at why willpower really isn't that effective long term in correcting addiction. Because if I'm making a decision about use down in my need center, I'm making a decision before I have conscious thought. So you can think about it in terms of, if I have to go to the bathroom, I can postpone it for a while with my will, but eventually, if I got to go, I got to go. So, willpower is not a bad thing, and in fact, I think addicts probably have more willpower than average people. That they, you know, in AA they would call it self-will run riot. Um, but willpower is just the wrong tool to attack uh, addiction with. It's like trying to put a screw in with a nail. I mean, or a screw in with a hammer. That a hammer, it's a good tool, but not on a screw. Uh, so then I knew that feeling that I was having when I was high was actually a need. Okay, being fulfilled. I just didn't know what need that was that was being fulfilled. So, I was a psychotherapist. I was going to continuing education. I happened to go to a workshop on attachment, and it all started falling together. Okay, because John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, proposed that probably our first and deepest need was for physical attachment. So if you wind the clock back to when we were living in the wild and I'm born, the first thing that I need is to attach to a caregiver. If I don't, I'm food. There's no way I'm going to survive. So it's very evolutionary. It's very common sense. The first need would be to attach physically. Um, he then went on to talk about that during the pre-verbal stage of our lives, we develop uh, patterns of emotional attachment, and that the correct pattern was basically that a mother or a caretaker and a child are physically playing together. They create this emotional bond, and this emotional bond instills the infant with ability and courage to go out and explore its environment. If the caretaker leaves, the child should distress, and then when the caregiver comes back, child should seek to reunite, reestablish that bond, and then it can go out and explore its environment again. And that this is a need. Now, when I was working with my therapist and he was talking about relying on other people, I was kind of resistant to that initially because I was a loner. Um, I live in America. We idolize the individual, all sorts of stuff like that. And he had told me that initially, when they started uh, placing premature children into incubators, that they all died, and they couldn't figure out why this was happening. But then they found that a newborn baby is actually programmed so that if it doesn't get a certain amount of physical touch from another human being, it will die. Uh, so, I mean, that's a need. That isn't a want or desire or anything. I mean, that's a physical need if the absence of it is going to kill you. I further found out that unfortunately, they conducted a very unethical experiment in the United States back in 1944, I believe, where they took 40 babies. They put them in identical environments. They fed them exactly the same. The only difference was that they engaged with 20 of them and they ignored 20 of them. They had to shut the experiment down within 4 months because half the infants uh, who were being ignored died. Uh, they simply lost the ability or the will to live. There was no physical reason for them to die. They just died. So again, I'm stuck with this idea that I need to attach to other people, uh, and that it is an actual need. And I have this other idea of what was that feeling that I had when I was getting high that was so wonderful. And again, through my own therapy and being part of group processes and things like that, uh, even though I didn't have the words for it, I started to feel as good and sometimes even better than when I was high. So that need was being fulfilled. I didn't know what need it was yet, but it was being fulfilled somehow. Um, and what it was I was actually creating a secure attachment with somebody else and being fully connected. Um, Once I went through the workshop on attachment, then I had the words to start talking about this. And I understood that feeling that I had always really wanted in my life and had been fulfilled by my drug and alcohol use was the feeling of secure attachment to another person. Um, and that there was loads of evidence out there to show that this was a real thing, even though people weren't directly talking about it. I mean, all therapists basically, the therapeutic process is based on attachment theory. As therapists, we provide a secure base and we create a secure attachment with the patient, and that fills them with the courage to explore their inner lives. I mean, that's just basic attachment 101. But we don't talk about it. And I had never purposefully tried to work on that area of myself. Okay. Now, John Bowlby, he's a smart guy. Um, and but he did kind of shoot himself in the foot, and he kind of doomed the theory because he believed that because attachment patterns are formed so early in the the pre-verbal stage of development, that there was no way to change them later in life. We couldn't access those. And I don't know, maybe he was right, maybe he was wrong. But I certainly know through my own work and working with patients that we can become far more effective at creating and maintaining secure attachments with other human beings if that's what we know we are trying to do. Okay. I just didn't know I was trying to do that. But, if I wanted to get that feeling, if I wanted to feel safe in the world, if I wanted to be courageous, I had to accept the fact that I was going to need to be able to build these secure attachments in my sobriety better than I had. Also, if you look at the Harlow monkey experiments, basically they give the monkey a cloth, if you don't remember it, a cloth mother, and they introduced a fear stimulus, and the monkey goes to the cloth mother. It feels comforted. It draws courage from that interaction, and then it can go out and explore the fear stimulus, be it like a horn or a flashing light. When they put in a wire mother, the monkey cannot go and seek comfort or courage from that. And all it can do is defecate. That's it. They introduce the fear stimulus and it just defecates. So, basically, when I was an addict, I had like a defecating monkey in my head. So that was not providing me with the courage to go out and explore my life. So once I understood that, and I had words to start talking about that with, then my practice really changed, and the work really changed. For one thing, the work became much richer and emotionally deep. Patients occasionally relapse, but the relapse were much shorter, and the patients got back into therapy much more quickly. And I think the most amazing thing was when I started to talk about addiction in terms of attachment disorder, they actually agreed. Intuitively, they knew that there was something wrong with them and the amount of loneliness that they felt. And one of my patients really said it better than I could ever say it. He said, I appreciate you framing all this work in terms of attachment, because before, when I had a craving, there was nothing I could do about it. I just had to write it out. But now I know if I'm having a craving, really what's going on is I'm experiencing my loneliness. And I can do something about that. Oh, sorry, just reading the chat again. And I can do something about that, and boy, if I could teach every addict in the world that when they were having a craving, what they were experiencing was their own loneliness, that would kind of change the face of, the problem that we face, but again, I didn't have the words or understanding to talk about this. But once I did, intuitively, my patients understood what they were trying to do. And the group work became much more centered on building attachment between the group members and less just, reporting behavior, which, look, we all need structure early on in sobriety, and we probably need structure all the way through. But, just reporting how many meetings I went to ain't going to give me a rich sobriety. But, once they started to identify and confront, the insecurities and the defenses that block them from forming secure attachments with others, then their sobrieties started opening up and becoming much richer. And I mean, that was wonderful. That was everything that I was looking for. And hopefully they were too. So that is kind of how I arrived at attachment. It's certainly not where I started. I was very cognitive behavioral when I started, but it's where I ended up, and the effects on my practice uh, and the work were fairly dramatic. And so, I wanted to get people talking more about attachment theory and how it relates. Now, I haven't thrown a lot of theory at you, but if you want theory, uh, go get this book, Attachment Addiction as an Attachment Disorder by Philip Flores. And within that book, it's 300 pages. It's a textbook, so it's pretty dry, but he's a good writer. You know, he covers he stuffs a lot of information into that book. He covers the addiction field and how it's split. Okay, great, and how it really split from the field of psychology with the introduction of Alcoholics Anonymous, because Alcoholics Anonymous was a abstinence-based approach, and the psychological field was still enmeshed in learning theory, and basically Alcoholics Anonymous worked better, and so treatment kind of followed them rather than the psychological field, and he puts it attachment theory up against other theories and shows in numerous different ways how it is more effective. There are plenty of case studies in there. I would not recommend it probably to a patient. It's fairly clinical and heavy, but for a clinician, absolutely, it's got everything in there. But again, you know, not only in the addiction field, but as a society, we have to start really taking this idea of attachment being a human need much more seriously. And I think the current situation with the pandemic has certainly shown uh, how important it is to be able to attach securely to other people. Now, with addiction, it's a tough sell if you're still using, because quite frankly, it was a lot easier to satisfy my need for attachment through getting high than it was going out and having to do the work with another individual, show the vulnerability, uh, have the empathy to really form a secure attachment. And if I could just get high and that need was fulfilled, I mean, it's a lot more reliable and it's a lot less work. But the problem with that is, oh, sorry, I was reading again. But the problem with that is, um, I only have that sensation. I only have that need fulfillment for the duration of when I'm high. So when that when I sober up, I am plunged back into loneliness and isolation. And the transition between that is, horrendous, and part of what drives the addiction. But actual secure attachment with other human beings, uh, it lasts over time and it lasts over space. It is certainly more enduring. Um, and frankly, if we don't create these secure attachments, we're just not going to have very deep relationships in our lives. And again, our sobriety is less fulfilling. I often say to my patients, especially if it's a new patient, I'll say, AA is, or 12 step is the foundation of sobriety, because we cannot maintain our own sobriety on our own. If you think you can, good luck. I'm not working with you, because I don't believe we can maintain our own sobriety on our own. So 12 step is your foundation, but I want to live in a big house. I didn't want to live on a foundation. So, I did the attachment work. I did the psychotherapy to build that house to live in. And it has certainly improved my own sobriety. Generally speaking, they kind of like that approach. And they intuitively understand the part that if they didn't have an attachment disorder before they became addicts, the addiction certainly caused an attachment disorder. Because it's so easy to fulfill through getting high, we get very lazy and out of practice actually forming secure attachments. I think normal people probably have some of the same feeling around this, because obviously you see, people are drinking, interacting less inhibited. And I think that is simply because they are feeling attached when they haven't done the work to have the attachment. And it's a guy who comes up and gives you a hug, and you're like, whoa, because he feels, he's experiencing the sensation of being connected to you, even though they're not, and that's a hard thing to explain to somebody, because I have no doubt, having been on the other side of that feeling or that connection feels real, and this leads to a lot of the problems with families, because the using addict, they feel connected, though their behavior is not creating a connection. They're feeling that, so they don't always understand why the families feel so abandoned and betrayed by the use. But on the outside, if you have ever seen anybody drinking, they're just not doing the behavior to create the connection. But I did say that I would go over like the basics of attachment disorder, so I want to do that. And first is what we're talking about, being back in the jungle. That our first and primary need is for physical attachment to a human being, to another human being. Now, when Bowlby and his associates were studying infants in the pre-verbal stage, they found that there were certain attachment styles. They're not super relevant to addiction work. They're kind of interesting, so I'll go over them with you. But the fact that addiction causes its own attachment disorder, I think, is the most important thing. But so first we have the secure attachment style. And for a secure attachment scenario, basically, this would be the child's behavior. There's stresses when the parent leaves, seek comfort when the parent returns, easily reassured by words and touch, explores when parent is present. Now, the parent's behavior is aware of child's emotional state, attends to child quickly when distressed, and consistently available and reassuring. So that is kind of the scenario of how we create a secure attachment. I mean, you can look at yourself as adults, and pretty much it's the same process. Then there are a few very distinct processes which created insecure attachments. They have the avoidant behavior, strategy, and activities, but with little enthusiasm. Now, the parent style would be rebuffs or deflects child's bid for comfort, avoids close body contact, appears unaware of child's emotional needs, and emphasizes achievement. Now, the funny thing about that one is that even though the child does not distress and seems ambivalent to the parent, some genius actually put heart monitors on these kids, and the kids are distressing when the parent leaves. Their heart rates go up, they physically distress, they are simply not showing it. Okay. Oh, maybe I did it wrong, but then you have the ambivalent attachment style. In that, the child's behavior is very distressed when parent absent, both angry and anxious at parent's return, clingy with parent, and unable to explore. And the parent's behavior would be inconsistent response to infant's emotional needs, unavailable, intrusive, mismatch between child's emotional and parent's response, may seek out and praise child's attention and support. So actually, I was right. Bowlby, the way you name these is more off the parent's behavior than the child's behavior. And the last, which is the one that makes me the saddest, is the child. Unique thing about it, it's called disorganized attachment style, and the child has a distinct behavior. They'll put their hand in the mouth, and as far as the behavior, shows both avoidant and ambivalent behavior. No strategy for managing anxiety. Responses are often extreme, and this would be caused by apparent major disturbance in the attachment system, caregiver depression, emotional neglect, physical or sexual abuse. But actually, that style is repeated in monkeys, where the child will actually put its hand to its mouth, and they obviously can't ask the child what's going on, but their best guess is that they are stifling a scream, which always makes me kind of sad. But so there's kind of the foundational stuff about attachment theory. Another tenet of attachment theory, which is extremely important, is that the individual cannot self-regulate their affect in the absence of secure attachment. Okay? Meaning that we need other people in order to regulate our own feelings. I had that absolutely backwards. You know, coming from an alcoholic household, I thought other people caused my dysregulation. And, you know, some people do. But I am not able to self-regulate it in isolation. That is a tenet of the theory. And I mean, I think it plays out pretty accurately in that you throw somebody into solitary confinement long enough, they will become emotionally dysregulated because they are not having contact or attachment with other humans. So I think there's credibility to that. I think that's basically the foundation of pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. And I definitely, just wanted to get you thinking about how giving patients the goal of creating secure attachment in their lives can enhance and stabilize their recovery. Uh, I, I absolutely believe that what anchors us in our sobriety are those secure attachments. Yes, I've been sober a little over 22 years, and I still attend AA meetings at least once a week. I still need the structure. It's a good reminder that I do not need to fulfill that need for attachment through use. And since my thinking's not going to do it, I have to do it through my behavior. But I think in the long term, it is those secure attachments that really anchor, stabilize, and enriching our sobriety. Another problem around that is, especially with alcohol, it is so meshed in our social culture uh, that it is difficult, to find spaces to interact and create these secure attachments with others outside of kind of 12-step structure. And I think as a society, we need to make more space for us to make these secure attachments when people aren't under the influence of drugs or alcohol, because those are going to be impaired attachments. I think honestly, I think we have done tremendously well during this pandemic. I thought we'd probably do worse, even though it's obvious that mental health issues, addiction, and suicide are way up. But I think maybe because of the advances in technology, we've been able to maintain some attachment with others, but we really have to take it more serious and make it as a goal of the recovery process is learning how to build these attachments. Um, well, I think that's almost all I have to say. I would, if what I talked about today interests you, you getting that book of and looking more into attachment. Uh, I would also, recommend that we all see attachment more as a human need that needs to be fulfilled continually, and not something that we can neglect as much as we do in our society. Uh, I wish 12-step programs had not been quite so successful being anonymous. So the larger society understood that there are people throughout the society that are in recovery, and we had more space within the society to connect not just with other people in recovery, but in the society. And I often wonder, just kind of off the cuff, that how far we would have advanced within our species interpersonally if we didn't have these blocks to uh, creating secure attachment. And we didn't substitute getting high so much for actual real human contact. Um, but I think with that, I'm going to open it up and see if there are any questions out there.
Thank you, Graham, for your amazing insights today. Thank you for sharing. So we're going to switch gears and we're going to move on to some live questions that were submitted during the webinar. Please note that if we're unable to get to your question, we will follow up with you, or Graham will follow up with you individually after the webinar. We've got first. So in the chat, Lila mentioned that in her experience, many clients name loneliness as a trigger for relapse. Can you share your thoughts on that, Graham?
I would totally agree. I think loneliness is a uh, it's probably the primary trigger for relapse. And we have to help patients understand that they can address their loneliness in other ways than getting high. Because I think absolutely that patient is satisfying their need for attachment through getting high and not feeling lonely for that period of time when they're high. But if we can teach them uh, that, that there are other ways of satisfying that need, um, it's just so much more healthy. But they have no history. I had a patient who came in and he said, Grandma, when I was working in, and he said, I'm sorry, I used last night. And I said, what happened? He said, well, I walked out, I stepped in a puddle, I was pissed off, and either I was going to call my sponsor, or I was calling the drug man. And drug man, he said, I knew what would happen. I didn't know what would happen if I called my sponsor. Okay. So they do have to rebuild kind of a history of understanding. If he was a sponsor, he might have made a connection, and that would have helped him regulate his emotions and feel connected.
Okay. Okay, so here's another one. And this is just from your own personal experience, Graham, as someone who has been sober for a long period of time. How do you simply define secure attachment?
Secure attachment would be an attachment that I understand can withstand conflict, uh, and that I am comfortable being myself in, uh, and don't spend all the time tending to the relationship, and can just be me and know that connection is going to be maintained regardless if we agree or not agree, and that it will not be terminated if we disagree.
Perfect. Okay. The next question pertains to emotional dysphoria. So the question says, where do you begin to start addressing emotional dysphoria as it relates to the possible attachment theory or lack thereof in infancy and adolescence?
Oh, I'm gonna have to pass on that. I don't know infant and adolescent therapy that well. I have a tough enough time dealing with adults. Anyone under 18, we don't get along. We kind of butt heads, and that may just have something to do with my emotional maturity, but I'm not sure. But I'm gonna have to pass on that one.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, next up, we've got what are the blocks to secure attachment, and what are the best ways to heal and remove these blocks?
Well, first of all, I got to identify what my insecurities are socially, and what my defenses are, for the purpose of building more secure relationships. If I don't have that motivation, I'm really not going to address my insecurities, because I'm embarrassed about them. Those are the things that I hide most deeply in me. So uh, I have to have the motivation that I'm going to get some benefit out of this, and then identify those insecurities, talk about them with a therapist and in my group, so they're normalized more. And then I also have to go and look back at my childhood and see what defenses I've built over time, and try to start dismantling those, because our defenses were brilliant for when we built them, but they just are no longer appropriate. But there's nothing dumb about our them.
Okay. So this next question has a relationships with early recovery. Can you speak to this in
I have a lot of theories on this. And one is that it is more for the protection of the old timers than the new people, even though they make it sound like it's for the new people. You get somebody in who's very green and unstable, that's a good, and they get in a relationship with somebody who's been around for a while, that's for the person with some time to relapse, is to follow them out through uh, the relationship. But honestly, a lot of stuff in AA is made up by the people in AA, and it's not part of the program. Um, the big thing is, I think within the first year of your sobriety, we changed so much that somebody who I might want to be with early on in that period of time, I might have no interest in whatsoever later. I mean, interpersonally, we just changed that much. And that's why they also say try not to make any big decisions your first year because, why buy a house at 6 months that at 12 months you're just not going to like anymore? And we do really change that much. I had no idea how much I was going to change that first year of my recovery.
Okay. This next question has to do with the brain, parts of the brain. So it says, what parts of the brain are associated with needs versus wants?
Well, the cortex is like our wants because that's our thought stuff. As far as they know, need base closer to the center of the brain, in the amygdala region. In the amygdala, they always used to think what was our fear center, but now they're thinking it may be more like our attention center. Like when the amygdala goes off, basically it's saying, pay attention to this, pay attention to this. But the human brain is a very complex thing, and as far as they know, it's near the center of the brain, near the amygdala.
Okay, yep, that's helpful. Okay, the next question is, how does an addict, for example, maybe a sex addict, guard against a secure attachment becoming an attachment disorder? And is the answer, is that kind of a dynamic talked about in the book that you referenced?
Yeah, he definitely talks about switching addictions, and that's very common within addictions, and that again, if we do not identify what our attachment disorders are, what our blocks to connections are, even if we start using a substance, we may switch to a behavior in an addictive manner to meet that need. Um, I've never really experienced a behavioral addiction, but I assume it makes people feel somewhat like I felt when I was high. I can't imagine that, but I'm sure it happens. I'm sure a lot of people can't imagine how I felt when I was high either. So again, for some reason, chemically, that need to feel safe and courageous in the world is fulfilled through the behavior.
Okay. This next question, and I think this may be our last question, is, are there any risks? So this has to do with AA again. Are there any risks to having all of your attachments and relationships be exclusively in the AA community during early recovery? Are there any risks to them?
Um, A AA is not the top of the barrel. AA is the bottom of the barrel. And being AA, I say that openly. Um, I would hope people had a broader sampling of people than just people in recovery. Look, some of my closest friends are in recovery. I love addicts and alcoholics as long as they're not using. I think we're great people. We got big personalities. We're not boring. We got great stories. Um, but I think there are good people out there too. I would I get worried about people becoming emotionally overly dependent on AA because I think again, addicts and alcoholics, we only make up at most 10 to 15% of the population. So I would hate to limit anybody to only that community. But other people in recovery were the only people who understood what I was going through early in recovery, and really the only people I could uh, create any kind of secure attachment with, because I didn't know how to talk vulnerably to people who weren't in recovery. So danger, it would just be that I became too emotionally dependent just on people in recovery.
Got it. Okay. So thank you again, Graham, and all of the attendees for joining us today. So we're going to go ahead and start closing out. So as a reminder, today's presentation is eligible for 1 social work credit. Please keep your Zoom session open to access the evaluation. And once completed, please allow 2 weeks to receive your certificate via email. And Care and Treatment Centers also invites you to join us next Tuesday for another webinar at 8 p.m. entitled Celebrating Creativity and Sobriety in the Time of COVID-19 in celebration of Neil Lasher, a dear friend and colleague of Karen who passed away 1 year ago. The presentation will feature some great musicians who are also advocates for recovery. And this will not be eligible for continuing education credits, but we do encourage you to share with your colleagues and patients as it is sure to be an inspiring experience. Visit karen.org/webinars at any time for more information or to register. Additionally, on Tuesday, April 13th, we look forward to hosting a virtual open house for our recently launched Grandview Women's Program at our Pennsylvania campus. Grab your lunch and join us at noon to get a firsthand look inside the facility, meet our staff, and ask questions about this unique program. Watch your email for more information. Please feel free to reach out to me, our admissions specialist, Abe Lynch, or our local regional resource director, James Flunche, if you have any questions about Encore in the future. And thank you for joining us and have a great afternoon.